Let me ask you something to start. How many of you know more about God than you actually experience of Him? You know the right things. You've read the verses. You've sat in the services. You could probably even explain the gospel to someone else. But there's this gap between what you know up here and what you actually experience and live down here. That gap is what this whole series is about. And I want you to know something before we go any further. This isn't a teaching about you trying harder. It's not about more discipline, more effort, more performance. It's about a revelation, and one that changes what you believe about yourself. And when that changes, everything else follows. So here's my story. I had a genuine desire for God, and that was never the problem. I had knowledge. I knew the right things. I even believed that I believed the right things, but I was stuck in this cycle. It was sin, shame, condemnation, and then back to sin. It was like the shame never led me to freedom. It led me back to the very thing that I was actually ashamed of. And the church environment that I was in, and the church environments I was in, wasn't deliberately malicious. It wasn't deliberately trying to mislead me. It was just incomplete. It had enough truth to keep me hungry, but not enough to actually set me free. And Paul actually addresses this in Galatians, and what he says is stronger than what most people even realize. He says, even if we or an angel from heaven preach any other gospel to you, let him be accursed. And then he says it again. So he says the same verse basically twice on purpose. Here's what's striking about that. Paul doesn't let him be accursed if his motives are wrong. He doesn't say let him be accursed if he's deliberately trying to deceive you. The sincerity of the messenger isn't the standard. The content of the message is. And a mixed gospel, grace plus law, finished work plus ongoing performance, is by Paul's definition a different gospel. And that's just full stop. That's not an attack on the people who taught it. It's just applying the standard that Paul already set. And when the pure gospel finally landed for me, the revelation of who I am in Christ, the cycle completely broke. Not because I tried harder, because the revelation changed everything about me. Now, most of us confuse two things that are actually very different. Shame and guilt. They sound familiar, but they're not. Guilt says, I did something bad. And shame says, I am something bad. Guilt is about behavior. It has a target. You can change the behavior, make it right, move forward, done. But shame is about your identity. And here's why that matters. You can't resolve shame by changing behavior, because shame isn't making a claim about what you did. It's making a claim about who you are. You can fix every behavior on your list, and shame will just find another fault to accuse you of. And this is the spiral, and you might even recognize it in your own life. Sin produces shame, and shame produces the belief that you're fundamentally bad. That belief creates this sense of distance from God. Not actual distance. God hasn't moved, but our perceived distance with him. And that perceived distance leads to more sin. And more sin leads to more shame. And the cycle continues to feed itself. See, willpower can interrupt it for a while, but it can't actually break it. Because the cycle isn't being driven by behavior. It's being driven by an identity belief. And Paul knew this better than anyone. Now, some people read Romans 7 as Paul describing his life before he knew Christ, but the text doesn't support that at all. The language throughout is present tense. I delight in the law of God. That's not the response of someone without God. Even Romans 8 verse 7, it says the unregenerate mind isn't even subject to God's law and can't be. An unregenerate person doesn't want to do right, and they find themselves unable. They just don't want it. Paul is describing a believer, specifically a believer who hasn't yet received what we're going to cover in sessions 3 and 4. The reality of a spirit made new in a body not yet redeemed explains exactly why the gap exists and why willpower can't close it. So listen to what he writes. For what I'm doing, I don't understand. What I want to do, I don't do. What I hate, that's what I do. That's not a man who doesn't care. That's a man with genuine desire and genuine knowledge who still can't close this gap. The will is there, the knowledge is there, but a gap is still present. And then he hits the bottom. O wretched man that I am, who will deliver me from this body of death? Notice the question, not what will deliver me, not what program, not what discipline, or what effort. Who? Now, Romans 8 verse 1 is the answer to that question, but we're not going there yet. And here's something I need you to understand before we get there. Information and revelation are not the same thing. Information tells you what is true. Revelation changes how you see yourself in light of what's true. You can hold every correct theological fact about the new creation and still live as the old man because the information hasn't become revelation. It hasn't dropped from your head into your heart. And mixed grace teaching can't close the gap because it keeps one foot in the old covenant. It gives you enough grace to hope and enough law to strive, but you can never know when you've done enough. The finish line just keeps on moving. And you feel like God's pleased with you when things are going really well and disappointed in you when they're not. And that feeling just isn't the gospel. That feeling is the old covenant dressing up in new covenant language. And it produces exactly the cycle that Paul describes. And so here's where we're going with it. So 2 Corinthians 5 verse 17. If anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. Old things have passed away and have become new. That's not an aspiration. That's not something you're working towards. That's a legal declaration about what happened to you at the new birth, at the cross. This teaching isn't about becoming something new. It's about seeing what you already are. The gap between what you know and what you live isn't a faith problem. It's a revelation problem. And make sure you stay tuned over the next 6 weeks. I have 6 teachings that I believe will change your identity. It will break the sin's shame cycle and it will destroy legalism off of your life. And there are so few churches today that are preaching the gospel purely. And many unknowingly are teaching Christians mixture, which keeps them in bondage. So let me close with a declaration, and you can say this out loud if you can. I am a new creation in Christ. Old things have passed away. I am not defined by my past, my failures, or my feelings. I am defined by what the cross established. The case against me has already been dismissed.